It was a warm afternoon, the kind of day when the streets were filled with children running home from school and parents hurrying to finish their errands. A young mother, Maria, had just picked up her little boy, Daniel, from school. He was carrying his backpack, swinging it side to side, humming a tune he had learned in class. For Maria, moments like these were priceless. She worked long hours, often struggling to make ends meet, but walking home with her son was the happiest part of her day. They decided to stop at a small grocery store before heading home. Maria wanted to pick up some fresh bread and a few apples. Daniel, as always, had his eyes set on the candy section, tugging at her sleeve with a playful smile. "Can we get just one chocolate bar?" he asked with wide eyes. Maria laughed softly and shook her head. "We'll see. First we get the bread. Candy comes last." The store was busy with people and the atmosphere was ordinary, even comforting. Nobody could have guessed what was about to happen. As Maria paid at the counter, she didn't notice the two men standing outside near a dark van. They were watching carefully, pretending to chat, but their eyes kept following her and her son. Maria and Daniel left the store, holding hands as they walked toward the quieter street leading home. She was telling him about dinner, asking what he wanted to eat. His little voice rose with excitement as he started listing his favorite dishes, making her laugh. The sound of their laughter seemed to echo on the empty street. Then everything changed in a blink. A van suddenly pulled up in front of them, blocking their way. The screech of the tires startled Maria so badly that she instinctively pulled Daniel closer to her side. The doors of the van opened quickly. Two men jumped out, their faces tense, their voices sharp as they told her to get inside. Maria froze for a second, her heart thudding in her chest. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt dry. She wanted to run, but her legs felt heavy. Daniel clung to her arm, confused and scared. The men didn't look like strangers passing by. They looked determined, like this was something they had planned. Maria tried to shield Daniel with her arms, whispering, "It's okay, stay close to me." Within moments, both of them were pushed toward the van. Maria's mind was racing. She was thinking about her family, about her boy, about what could happen if she resisted too much. Fear was pressing down on her chest, but all she cared about was keeping her son safe. As the van door closed behind them, the sound of the street outside faded. Daniel began to cry softly, pressing his face into his mother's side. Maria wrapped her arms around him, whispering, "I'm here, don't be scared." But her own hands were trembling. Inside the van, the men spoke in hurried voices. They seemed sure of themselves, convinced that nobody had seen them. One of them said, "Relax, it's clean." Nobody noticed. The other nodded, adding, "We'll be gone before anyone knows." Maria sat quietly, holding her son tighter, her thoughts running wild. She wanted to find a way out, but the moving vehicle, the strangers, and the uncertainty made it impossible to think clearly. She looked at Daniel, who was staring back at her with frightened eyes. For his sake, she tried to stay calm, tried to show strength she didn't feel. The van turned off the main road, moving toward a quieter part of town. The men laughed occasionally, their voices carrying a sense of arrogance as if everything was under their control. Maria noticed how they didn't even look behind them. They truly believed no one was watching, no one would interfere. But they were wrong. Just moments before, as Maria and Daniel left the store, someone else had noticed. A man sitting across the street inside a small diner had seen the van waiting too long, the way its engine stayed running. He had noticed the suspicious way the men looked around, not at the store windows, but at the people coming out. Something about it didn't sit right with him. From where he sat, he watched as the mother and child were stopped and pulled inside the van. He didn't wait. He didn't waste a second. Throwing a few bills on the table, he rushed outside to his car. His eyes stayed fixed on the van as it drove away, and he quietly followed, keeping just enough distance to remain unnoticed. Back inside the van, Maria tried to memorize every detail she could. She looked at the men's clothes, the sound of their voices, the scratches on the floor of the van, even the direction they were turning. It was a desperate attempt to hold on to any detail that might help later. She prayed silently, her lips moving without sound. Daniel tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Mama, where are they taking us?" His voice was small, fragile, breaking her heart. Maria hugged him tightly, her eyes stinging with tears. She wanted to tell him everything would be fine, but she wasn't sure. All she could say was, "Stay close to me. Don't be afraid." "I'm right here," The men seemed unaware of the storm of emotions happening in the back seat. They were too caught up in their own overconfidence. To them, this was just another plan that would work out easily. They thought the world outside had not even noticed. They didn't know that every second was being watched, that someone was already on their trail. And as the van rolled deeper into the quiet streets, Maria held her son closer than ever, her heart beating faster with every turn. She didn't know it yet, but the next few minutes would change everything. Inside the van, the air felt heavy. Maria could hear the sound of the tires rolling against the road and the men's voices as they spoke to each other in low tones. They were confident, too confident, as if this was something they had done before. They didn't even bother to whisper. One of them chuckled and said, "This is easier than I thought. No one saw us. By the time anyone notices, we'll be long gone." The other nodded and added, "She won't dare make a sound. Look at her. She's scared to death." Maria sat silently with her son pressed tightly against her, her arms wrapped around him like a shield. But inside her chest, her heart was beating so hard it almost hurt. She was scared, yes, but her fear was not for herself, it was for her little boy. She kept her face calm, refusing to show the men the panic burning inside her. She whispered softly to Daniel, "It's okay, I'm here. Don't worry. We'll be fine." Daniel, his eyes wide with confusion, nodded slowly and clung to her side. He didn't understand everything, but he could sense his mother's fear, and it made him even more frightened. The van took a sharp turn, moving farther away from the busy part of town. The buildings became fewer, the roads quieter, and the sound of traffic faded into silence. To Maria, every turn felt like a step farther away from safety. The men continued talking, laughing occasionally as if this was nothing more than a casual drive. Their arrogance made Maria's skin crawl. She tried to focus on their words, listening carefully. Every detail mattered. Every word could give her a clue about where they were going or what they were planning. What the men didn't realize was that their perfect plan was not so perfect after all. Just a few cars behind them, another vehicle was following closely. The driver was calm, steady, and alert. He had been sitting in a small diner across the street earlier, sipping his coffee when he saw the van waiting. Something about it caught his eye. Most cars parked for a reason. People got out, bought something, or met someone. But this van just sat there with its engine running, and the men inside kept scanning the area instead of minding their own business. Then he saw it. The mother and child leaving the store, walking hand in hand, their faces full of peace, and in the next instant he saw them being grabbed and pulled inside the van. He didn't even think twice. He jumped into his car, started the engine, and began following. His years of experience had trained him to notice when something wasn't right. This was no ordinary scene. He knew danger when he saw it. Now as he followed the van, he kept his distance, careful not to draw attention. His eyes stayed locked on the vehicle ahead, watching every turn, every move. His mind was focused on one thing, making sure the woman and her child were safe. Meanwhile, inside the van, Maria's mind was racing. She thought about her family, her neighbors, even the people in the store they had just left. Did anyone notice? Did anyone see what happened? She didn't know that someone was already behind them, watching closely. Daniel whispered again, his little voice breaking. "Mama, are we going home?" Maria stroked his hair gently, forcing herself to smile even though her heart was breaking. "Yes, my love. We'll be home. Just stay with me." She didn't want him to see her fear. She wanted him to feel safe even in this moment of terror. The men kept talking, boasting about how smooth their plan was. "It's clean," one of them said proudly. "No witnesses, no mistakes. By tonight, we'll be set." Maria listened carefully, every word feeding her determination. They thought no one saw. They thought they were in control. But deep inside, she held on to hope that somehow, somewhere, someone might have noticed. The van slowed down briefly at a red light, and Maria glanced out of the small window, trying to catch any sign of where they were. The streets looked unfamiliar. The buildings were older, the roads quieter. Her chest tightened with dread. She looked at Daniel and pulled him even closer. Back in the car behind them, the silent follower kept his eyes sharp. He could see the fear in the mother's face through the back window, her arms wrapped protectively around her boy. His hands gripped the wheel tighter. He had seen many things in his life, but the sight of a mother trying to comfort her child in such a moment struck him deeply. He quietly reached for the small radio on the dashboard. His calm voice carried authority as he spoke. giving the location, describing the van, and requesting immediate backup. He knew he had to stay close until help arrived. Every second mattered. Maria, unaware of the eyes watching from behind, kept whispering prayers under her breath. She told herself not to give up, not to lose hope. Daniel rested his head against her chest, slowly calming down at the sound of her heartbeat. To him, as long as his mother was there was still safety. The men in the front laughed again, still convinced everything was under their control. They didn't bother to check the mirrors. They didn't notice the car trailing them steadily, never too close, never too far. The streets grew quieter, the light outside dimming as the sun lowered. The van rolled on, carrying with it 2 lives caught in fear, and behind it followed a man who refused to let them vanish. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, holding her son tightly, and thought, if anyone out there saw us, please don't let them forget us. And somewhere behind them, someone had already made that silent promise. The van kept moving steadily, rolling deeper into quieter streets. Inside, Maria held her son close, whispering soft words to calm him, though her own hands wouldn't stop trembling. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to hide her fear. But the truth was, every passing second felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Daniel's small fingers gripped her arm tightly, as if he was afraid that letting go would mean losing her forever. The men in the front were still talking with confidence. They had no idea how quickly things were changing outside their little bubble. They thought they were invisible. They thought the streets were empty. They thought no one cared. But what they didn't know was that someone had seen everything. A short distance behind them, another car followed. The man inside it had his eyes fixed firmly on the van, his hands steady on the wheel. He wasn't just any passerby. He was trained to notice danger, trained to act when others froze. Even though he was off duty, his instincts never slept, and the moment he saw that woman and child being forced into the van, his entire body reacted. He had been at the diner just across the street when it happened. At first, he thought it was just another ordinary day. He had been sipping his coffee, listening to the hum of conversations around him. But something outside caught his attention. The van parked too long, the men inside looking around instead of minding their own business. His years of experience had taught him one thing: danger rarely announces itself with loud sounds. It often begins quietly with small signs most people overlook. And then within seconds, it unfolded right in front of his eyes. The van moved suddenly, blocking the path of the woman and her son. He saw the panic in her face, the way she pulled her boy closer. He saw the men jump out, too fast, too deliberate. He knew instantly this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something far worse. By the time the van doors slammed shut, he was already on his feet, throwing a few bills onto the counter, rushing outside. His car started with a roar, but his movements were calm, precise. He knew he couldn't afford to lose them, and he knew he couldn't afford to be noticed either. Now as the van drove on, he followed at just the right distance. Not too close, not too far. Just enough to keep them in sight. Just enough to blend with the traffic whenever there was any. His mind stayed sharp, his heart steady, though a spark of anger burned inside him. He had seen a lot in his life, but the sight of a child in danger always struck the deepest. Inside the van, Maria glanced out of the small back window whenever she could, hoping to see something familiar. Anything that might tell her where they were. But the streets looked strange, quiet, almost deserted. She whispered to herself, "Please, God, someone help us." Daniel lifted his head, his little voice trembling. "Mama, are we going to be okay?" Maria pressed a kiss to his forehead, holding back her tears. "Yes, my love. We're going to be okay. Just hold on to me." She didn't know that help was already closer than she imagined. The man trailing the van reached for his radio, his calm voice filling the small space of his car. He gave the location, the direction, the description of the van, and asked for backup. His tone was steady but firm, carrying the weight of someone who knew every second counted. He was careful with his words, not wanting to alarm anyone unnecessarily, but clear enough that his request couldn't be ignored. He kept one eye on the road and the other on the van, noting every turn they took, every stop, every hesitation. He knew he had to be patient. Timing was everything. If he acted too soon, he risked pushing the men into doing something reckless. If he waited too long, he risked losing the mother and child forever. Inside the van, the men seemed completely at ease. They talked about their plans, about how quickly everything was going to work out for them. They didn't even bother to check the mirrors. Their arrogance blinded them, made them careless. Maria listened quietly, her mind racing. She was terrified, but she was also sharp. She tried to remember their words, their voices, even their accents. She knew that every small detail could matter later. It was the only way she felt like she still had some control. She refused to let fear completely break her. Daniel tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, can we go home now?" The innocence in his voice nearly shattered her heart. She hugged him tightly, her lips brushing his hair. "Soon, my love. Very soon." The man in the trailing car saw the child's small face in the window for just a moment. The fear in his eyes cut straight into him. It wasn't just about duty anymore. It was personal. He had promised himself long ago that whenever he saw innocence threatened, he would never look away. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he kept following. He wasn't going to lose them, not now, not ever. The van slowed again at another intersection, and for a moment Maria's heart leapt. She saw another car behind them. Just a regular car, nothing special, but it was there. For the first time since being forced inside, she felt the tiniest spark of hope. She couldn't know for sure if that car was following for her sake, but something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone. She held Daniel tighter, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "Hold on, sweetheart. Someone's watching. I can feel it." The van picked up speed again, but the car behind matched it smoothly, never losing sight. The men in the front laughed, talking about how simple everything had been. One of them even said, "Nobody even saw us. It's like we're invisible." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, a quiet determination settling inside her chest. "You're wrong," she thought. "Someone saw. I know it." And as the van rolled deeper into the quiet streets, carrying them toward the unknown, the silent guardian behind them kept his steady watch, waiting for the right moment to act. The men thought they were in control. But their mistake wasn't in taking a risk. Their mistake was believing that nobody cared enough to notice. What they didn't know was that the eyes following them had already made a silent promise. This wouldn't end the way they expected. The van finally slowed down as it reached the edge of town. The tall buildings were gone now, replaced with wide-open fields and scattered warehouses that looked old and unused. The roads were empty, the silence almost unsettling. Maria felt her stomach twist when she realized they were being taken somewhere far from people, far from help. She pulled Daniel closer to her chest and whispered, "Stay with me, don't let go." Her son buried his face in her arms, trying to hide from the men in the front. His small body trembled, and Maria could feel every shiver. She wanted nothing more than to take him home, to sit with him in their little kitchen and laugh about ordinary things again. But right now she had to stay strong because fear wouldn't save them. Only courage would. The men in the front seat were still talking with ease, as if they were on a casual drive. One of them looked over his shoulder and smirked. "Don't bother fighting," he said with arrogance. "You're not going anywhere. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, it'll be too late." Maria didn't answer. She just held Daniel tighter and looked away, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. What the men didn't realize was that their every move was still being followed. A short distance behind, the same car trailed them silently. The man inside kept his eyes sharp, watching with the patience of someone who had been in situations like this before. He had already called for backup, but he knew help would take a little time to arrive. Until then, it was his responsibility to keep the woman and child safe. His heart stayed steady, but he felt a burning determination inside. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy's frightened face in the back window. He thought about his own life, the times he had seen innocent people caught in moments they didn't deserve. He couldn't let this become another tragedy. The van finally turned into a dirt path leading to a run-down warehouse. Its windows were broken, its walls covered in rust and graffiti. To Maria, it looked like the kind of place people went to disappear. The van came to a stop and one of the men jumped out, pulling the sliding door open with a loud scrape. "Out," he ordered firmly. Maria hesitated, holding Daniel even closer. "Please, he's just a child," she whispered, her voice shaking. The man frowned, irritated. "I said out. Now." Maria slowly stood up, her arms still around her son, and stepped onto the dirt ground. She looked around quickly, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the area was deserted. Or so it seemed. The men pushed her forward toward the warehouse. Daniel clung to her side, his small hand gripping hers tightly. Maria whispered, "Don't be afraid. Keep walking." I'm right here. The follower parked his car a short distance away, hidden behind an old fence. From where he stood, he could see everything. The van, the men, the mother and child being led inside the warehouse. His jaw tightened. He knew the situation was reaching a critical point. He stepped out of his car quietly, moving with precision. His eyes scanned the area, his ears listening for every sound. He moved closer, staying low, his steps silent on the dirt ground. He was ready now. He had waited for the right moment, and it had come. Inside the warehouse, the men pushed Maria and Daniel toward the center of the room. The air smelled of dust and rust, the floor covered in old debris. Daniel's eyes darted around nervously, and Maria bent down slightly to whisper, "Don't let go of my hand." The men started talking again, bragging about how smooth everything had been. They laughed, completely unaware that danger for them was only seconds away. Suddenly, the silence outside broke with the sharp screech of tires. Maria's head jerked toward the sound, her heart skipping a beat. The men froze, their laughter dying instantly. Before they could react, the door to the warehouse burst open. A figure stepped inside with a firm, commanding presence. His voice rang out strong, cutting through the dusty air. "Enough. It's over." The men spun around, shocked, their confidence melting away in an instant. They hadn't expected this. They thought no one knew. They thought they were safe here. But now, standing before them was someone who clearly wasn't afraid of them. Maria's heart surged with relief as she realized help had come. She pulled Daniel behind her protectively, her eyes locked on the figure at the door. The man raised his voice again, steady and unshakable. "Step away from them. Now." For a moment, the men hesitated, glancing at each other nervously. Their arrogance was slipping, replaced with the first flickers of fear. They had underestimated everything. They thought they had control. But in this moment, they were powerless. One of the men tried to act tough, taking a step forward as if to challenge him. But the authority in the man's stance and the fire in his eyes stopped him in his tracks. The confidence they had earlier was gone. Maria watched closely, her heart pounding. She could feel Daniel shaking behind her, but she whispered softly, "It's okay. Look, someone's here. We're safe now." The men stammered, their voices no longer filled with certainty. They started to beg, their words stumbling over each other. All their earlier pride had turned into desperation. The man at the door didn't waver. He moved forward, calm but firm, his presence filling the room. The men finally realized they were cornered. This wasn't going to end the way they planned. Maria hugged her son tightly, tears streaming down her face, not of fear this time, but of overwhelming relief. She whispered into his hair, "We're going to be okay. We're really going to be okay." And as the men lowered their heads, their voices shaking as they pleaded, the truth settled into the room. The hunters had become the hunted, and the people they thought were powerless were now protected by someone who refused to let evil win. For Maria and Daniel, the nightmare was finally cracking open, light pouring in through the darkness. And for the men who thought they controlled everything, the harsh reality was clear. They were the ones begging now. The warehouse was silent, except for the heavy breathing of the two men who had been so sure of themselves only minutes earlier. Their voices, once loud and arrogant, now trembled as they begged for a chance. Gone was their false confidence, replaced with fear they could no longer hide. The man who had followed them stood tall, calm, his steady eyes locked on them as if every detail mattered. Maria held her son tightly, unable to stop the tears from rolling down her cheeks. But these tears were different now. They weren't just fear anymore, they were relief, hope, and gratitude all at once. She could feel Daniel's tiny heart pounding against her chest, but slowly his breathing was calming down. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt like maybe they really would be safe. The man stepped forward, his voice steady, firm, and without hesitation. "It's over. You're not in control anymore." The men looked at each other helplessly. Just moments ago they had been laughing, certain that nothing could go wrong. But now their plan had collapsed in front of them, and all they could do was plead. "Please don't hurt us," one of them stammered. His earlier arrogance was gone. He could barely keep his voice steady. The other nodded quickly, raising his hands in surrender. We didn't mean..." "It wasn't supposed to." His words trailed off, lost in fear. The man ignored their excuses. He turned his head slightly, speaking into the small radio clip to his belt. His voice was calm as he gave the location, making sure help would arrive soon. He had been trained for moments like this, and he knew the importance of staying in control until backup came. Maria's knees almost gave way when she heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The sound grew louder and closer with each passing second. To her, it was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. It meant they weren't alone anymore. It meant this nightmare was finally coming to an end. Daniel lifted his head and whispered softly, "Mama, is it over?" His little voice was filled with both hope and exhaustion. Maria hugged him tightly and kissed the top of his head. "Yes, my love. It's over. We're safe now." The sirens stopped outside the warehouse, followed by the sound of car doors slamming shut and footsteps rushing in. Within moments, uniformed officers poured into the building. Their presence filled the space with authority, their movements swift and coordinated. The two men who had been so bold now dropped to their knees, their voices rising in desperate pleas. But their begging meant nothing now. The officers quickly restrained them, handcuffs clicking around their wrists. Their protests and excuses were drowned out by the sound of orders being given and the steady voices of law enforcement taking control. Maria felt her shoulders finally relax. Her body shook with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She had been strong for her son, but now that the danger was truly gone, the weight of everything hit her all at once. Tears streamed down her face, and she buried her head against Daniel's hair, whispering over and over, "We're safe, we're safe." The man who had followed the van stepped closer, his voice gentle now. "You're okay. They won't touch you again." Maria looked up at him through her tears, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you. We would have been lost without you." He shook his head softly. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should do when they see something wrong." But Maria knew better. Not everyone would have noticed. Not everyone would have acted. To her, this man wasn't just a bystander. He was the reason she and her son were alive and unharmed. An officer approached gently, kneeling down so he wouldn't tower over Daniel. His voice was soft and kind. "Hey, little guy. You're safe now. We'll take you both somewhere warm and you can rest." Daniel nodded shyly, still clinging to his mother's arm. He didn't fully understand everything that had happened, but he knew one thing for certain. His mother had never let go, not even for a second. The officers escorted Maria and her son outside into the cool night air. The flashing red and blue lights painted the scene around them, and the soft hum of radios filled the atmosphere. For Maria, those lights weren't frightening. They were a sign of safety, of protection. She looked at her son's tired face and brushed a hand across his cheek. "We're going home," she whispered. The man who had followed them watched quietly as the situation came under full control. He didn't need recognition, and he didn't seek praise. All that mattered to him was that the woman and her child were safe. As the men who had caused the nightmare were led away in handcuffs, their heads hung low, Maria couldn't help but notice how quickly their confidence had turned into weakness. Just minutes earlier, they had believed they were untouchable. Now they were the ones begging for mercy, powerless and exposed. One of the officers turned to Maria and spoke softly. "You were very brave. Holding yourself together for your son, that takes strength." Maria shook her head, still holding Daniel close. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified." The officer gave a small smile. "Sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you kept going anyway." Those words stayed with Maria as she and Daniel were gently guided to a patrol car. The doors were opened for them and a blanket was draped over her shoulders. Daniel leaned against her side, already drifting off, his small body finally giving in to exhaustion. Maria looked at his peaceful face and felt her heart swell with gratitude. He was safe. That was all that mattered. The man who had followed them gave a final nod to the officers, then turned to leave quietly. He didn't need to stay. His job here was done, but as he walked back toward his car, he glanced once more at the mother and child. Their faces told him everything. Fear had given way to relief. Despair had turned into hope. Maria caught his glance and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." He gave her a small nod in return before disappearing into the night. For Maria and Daniel, life would never quite be the same after that day. The memory of what had happened would always linger, but so would the memory of the stranger who refused to look away. They would carry both, the fear and the rescue, with them forever. That night, as they finally made it back to the comfort of their own home, Maria tucked Daniel into bed and sat by his side until he fell asleep. She watched his chest rise and fall, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe freely. She whispered softly into the quiet room. We were never alone. Someone was watching over us. And in her heart, she knew it was true. The men who had once thought they were predators had been reduced to begging, their arrogance destroyed in just a few short minutes. But more importantly, a mother and her child had been given back the gift of safety, because someone cared enough to act. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they don't even want recognition. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who refuse to look away when others are in danger. And for Maria and Daniel, that was the only reason they were safe to face tomorrow together.